Dearest listeners, is there anything more delicious than watching a scandal transform into the season's greatest love story? This author has witnessed many a reputation resurrected, but none quite so spectacularly as the tale I bring you today. A story of false ruin, stubborn honor, and the magnificent collision that occurs when a gentleman's duty meets a lady's pride. But let us not rush, for the best scandals, like the finest wine, must be savored properly. Our tale begins on what should have been an ordinary Thursday evening at the Pembroke Ball in May of 1819, where Miss Victoria Ellsworth stood as she always did, surrounded by admirers yet somehow delightfully alone in her thoughts. One must understand, gentle listeners, that Victoria Ellsworth was not your typical diamond of the first water, though she certainly sparkled enough to blind half the gentlemen in London. At 24, she had already refused no fewer than 12 proposals. This author kept careful count, each rejection delivered with such gracious kindness that the rejected suitors often thanked her for the privilege of being refused. She possessed that rare combination of beauty and wit that made her equally comfortable discussing Shakespeare with scholars or gossip with dowagers, though she infinitely preferred the former. Victoria had hair the color of autumn leaves, that fascinating shade between brown and red that seemed to catch fire in the candlelight, and eyes of such a deep green that one poet had compared them to emeralds drowned in forest pools. Terrible poetry, but the sentiment was appreciated. She moved through society with a confidence that came not from her considerable dowry or her impeccable bloodlines, but from a mind that refused to be confined by the narrow expectations of the ton. What made Victoria truly extraordinary, however, was her complete and utter disinterest in marriage for marriage's sake. She had declared, much to her mother's horror, that she would only marry for love, deep, passionate, soul-consuming love, or not at all. The fact that she had reached the advanced age of 24 without compromising this position had made her something of a legend among the more romantic-minded debutantes and a source of endless frustration for her well-meaning mama. But I digress, for we must now turn our attention to the other half of our equation, Lord Nicholas Bramwell, whose reputation for honor was so spotless it practically gleamed. Oh, gentle listeners, how does one describe a man who had made propriety into an art form? Lord Bramwell, at 29, had never been touched by even a whisper of scandal. He had never gambled beyond what he could afford, never drank to excess, never engaged in those rakish pursuits that made other gentlemen so delightfully dangerous. He was the gentleman mothers pointed out to their daughters as the ideal husband, handsome enough with his sandy hair and serious gray eyes, wealthy enough with his estate in Kent, and so perfectly, impossibly, mind-numbingly proper that even this author had occasionally wondered if he might actually be carved from marble rather than flesh and blood. Yet, and here is where it becomes interesting, beneath that pristine exterior beat the heart of a romantic so secret that even he seemed unaware of it. This author had observed him at numerous balls, and while he danced the requisite dances and made the appropriate conversation, his eyes would sometimes drift to the windows as if he were looking for something or someone who had not yet arrived. Lord Bramwell's dedication to honor was legendary. He had once traveled 2 days through a snowstorm to repay a £5 debt. He had stood as second in 3 duels, not because he enjoyed violence, but because gentlemen had requested his presence, knowing his reputation for fairness was unimpeachable. He was the sort of man who would return a penny of incorrect change and help elderly ladies across streets even when it made him late for important appointments. In short, dearest listeners, he was exactly the sort of gentleman one would expect to step forward when a lady's reputation was threatened, which brings us to the incident that changed everything. The Pembroke Ball was in full swing when disaster struck with all the subtlety of a cannon blast. Victoria had stepped out onto the terrace for a breath of fresh air. The ballroom was stifling, and she had just endured a particularly tedious conversation with Lord Hemingway about his prized pig collection. This author observed her exit and thought nothing of it. Young ladies often needed respite from the crush of a ball. What happened next remains a subject of debate, but this author, through careful investigation and a well-placed bribe to a footman, has pieced together the truth. Victoria had been on the terrace for perhaps 3 minutes when Mr. Reginald Ashford, a man whose reputation was as spotted as Lord Bramwell's was clean, stumbled out, thoroughly foxed and in search of fresh air to clear his head. Finding Victoria alone, the fool attempted to steal a kiss. The attempt, gentle listeners, was spectacularly unsuccessful. Victoria, who had spent her childhood wrestling with 3 older brothers, delivered a slap that could be heard in the ballroom, followed by a few choice words that would have made a sailor blush, though this author found them rather admirable under the circumstances. Unfortunately, at that precise moment, Lady Weatherby, the ton's most vicious gossip, stepped onto the terrace with her equally poisonous daughter. What they saw was Mr. Ashford holding his cheek, Victoria with her hair slightly mussed from the struggle, and the two of them alone in a compromising location. By the time Victoria returned to the ballroom, the whispers had already begun. Like a poisonous miasma, the gossip spread from one group to another. The story grew with each telling. A stolen kiss became a passionate embrace, a brief struggle became a lengthy assignation, and by the time it reached the card room, some were claiming they had been discovered in a state of complete dishevelment. Victoria, initially unaware of the growing storm, noticed the change gradually. Dance partners suddenly remembered prior commitments. Ladies who had been friendly moments before now gave her the cut direct. Mothers pulled their daughters away when she approached, as if ruin were contagious. This author watched the realization dawn on her face, that moment when understanding struck like a physical blow. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and she walked through that ballroom like a queen approaching the scaffold, refusing to show how deeply the cuts wounded her. It was then that Lord Nicholas Bramwell entered the ballroom, late as he had been helping a stranger whose carriage had overturned. He took in the scene with those serious gray eyes. Victoria, standing alone like an island in a sea of turned backs, the whispers that fell silent as he passed, the uncomfortable shuffling of gentlemen who suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Without hesitation, without even stopping to ask what had occurred, Lord Bramwell walked directly to Victoria. The entire ballroom held its breath as he executed a perfect bow and requested the honor of the next dance. The look on Victoria's face, surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope, nearly broke this author's heart. She accepted his hand, and he led her onto the dance floor for a waltz, ignoring the gasps and mutters from the assembled crowd. They danced in splendid isolation, the other couples having mysteriously remembered urgent needs elsewhere. Lord Bramwell's face remained perfectly composed, as if dancing with a social pariah were the most natural thing in the world. Victoria, for her part, held herself with a dignity that this author found magnificent. When the dance ended, Lord Bramwell did something that sent shockwaves through the ton. He led Victoria directly to his mother, the formidable Dowager Lady Bramwell, and made introductions as if Victoria were the most sought-after young lady in the room rather than its current scandal. The Dowager, bless her, rose to the occasion beautifully. She engaged Victoria in conversation about poetry, ignoring the horrified stares of her contemporaries with the skill of a woman who had weathered 60 years of society nonsense. The next morning brought the full horror of Victoria's situation into sharp relief. The morning callers who usually filled the Ellsworth drawing room had vanished like morning mist. The few who did arrive came not to visit, but to gawk, their eyes bright with the particular cruelty of those who feast on others' misfortune. Victoria sat in the empty drawing room, her hands folded in her lap, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her mother had taken to her bed with a fit of vapors, her father had locked himself in his study, and her brothers were making threatening noises about calling out Mr. Ashford, though Victoria had forbidden them from doing anything so foolish. It was into this scene of genteel devastation that Lord Bramwell arrived, accompanied by his mother and bearing enough flowers to stock a conservatory. The butler, so shocked by the arrival of respectable callers that he nearly forgot to announce them, stumbled over their names. Lord Bramwell's mission became clear within minutes. He had come, he announced to Victoria's hastily summoned parents, to offer the protection of his name. He would marry Victoria immediately, salvaging her reputation through the sheer force of his spotless honor. This author, listening from behind a conveniently placed Chinese screen, One does what one must for a good story, watched Victoria's face transform from gratitude to something far more complex. She thanked him for his kindness, his nobility, his unparalleled sense of honor. Then she refused him. The silence that followed could have been cut with a butter knife. Lord Bramwell, who had clearly never been refused anything in his perfectly ordered life, looked as if she had spoken in ancient Sumerian. Her parents appeared ready to faint. Even the dowager raised an eyebrow. Victoria explained, with a composure that belied the tears this author could see her fighting, that she would not have anyone marry her from duty. She would not be a burden taken on to satisfy some gentleman's sense of honor. She had always promised herself she would marry for love or not at all, and scandal would not force her to compromise that principle. Lord Bramwell argued. Oh, how he argued. He spoke of reputation, of her future, of the doors that would close to her. He painted a bleak picture of spinsterhood and social exile. He used every logical argument at his disposal, and Lord Bramwell, it must be said, possessed considerable powers of persuasion. But Victoria remained unmoved. She would rather be ruined and true to herself than respectable and living a lie. She thanked him again, wished him well, and asked him to leave. The look on Lord Bramwell's face as he departed was something this author will never forget. It was confusion, certainly, but also something else, a dawning respect, perhaps even admiration, for a woman who would choose principle over protection. Later that evening, this author learned, Lord Bramwell sat alone in his perfectly appointed study. He looked upon the ledgers that chronicled his faultless life, the letters of thanks for his honorable deeds, and for the first time saw not a fortress of respectability, but a cage. Victoria's refusal echoed in the silent room, not as an insult, but as a revelation. She had spoken of love, a force so potent it made his lifetime of duty feel like a hollow, bloodless thing. The marble man was cracking, realizing he was living a half-life, and the thought was unbearable. The turn came at, of all things, a musical afternoon at Lady Hastings' residence. Victoria had not planned to attend, she had not attended anything for weeks, but Lady Hastings, her godmother, and one of the few who still acknowledged her, had insisted. Victoria sat in the back row, trying to be invisible, when Lord Bramwell entered. Their eyes met across the room, and something electric passed between them. He did not approach. She had asked him to leave her be, and he was too much a gentleman to impose. But he watched her throughout the performance with an intensity that made her hands tremble. After the music ended, as Victoria tried to make a discreet exit, she found herself trapped on the terrace by Mr. Ashford himself. The villain had cornered her, drunk again, attempting to suggest that since her reputation was already ruined, she might as well make the rumors true. This author was about to intervene. Even professional observation has its limits, when Lord Bramwell appeared like an avenging angel. What followed was not a display of his usual perfect propriety. Instead, gentle listeners, Lord Nicholas Bramwell, paragon of honor, knocked Mr. Ashford flat with a single, perfectly executed punch. It was not the clumsy blow of a brawler, but the sudden, sharp release of a pressure that had been building for a lifetime. As Ashford lay groaning on the terrace, Bramwell turned to Victoria, his knuckles bleeding, his perfect cravat askew, and his eyes blazing with an emotion that had nothing to do with honor and everything to do with something far more primitive. He informed her, in a voice that shook with barely controlled emotion, that he had been a fool. He had offered her marriage for all the wrong reasons, not for honor, not for duty, but because the thought of her suffering made him want to tear London apart brick by brick. He had been too stupid to recognize his own feelings, hiding them behind a shield of propriety and duty. Victoria, for perhaps the first time in her life, found herself completely speechless. She stood there, staring at this usually perfectly composed gentleman who had just committed his first act of public violence for her sake and saw him truly for the first time. But before either could speak further, chaos erupted. Ashford's friends appeared, challenges were issued, and the entire scene descended into the kind of melodrama usually reserved for Italian opera. Victoria was whisked away by her godmother, and Lord Bramwell was dragged off by his seconds to prepare for what would surely be a duel. The duel was set for dawn in Hyde Park, as these things traditionally were. This author, naturally, made arrangements to observe from a safe distance, purely for historical accuracy, you understand. One must note, however, that this was a perilous time for such affairs. The crown had begun to take a dim view of dueling, and gentlemen involved, regardless of the outcome, faced not only social censure, but the very real threat of legal prosecution and exile. Lord Bramwell was risking not just his life, but his entire future. Victoria had other plans. She appeared at the dueling ground dressed in her brother's clothes, her hair tucked under a cap, just as the principals were taking their positions. The shock of her appearance nearly caused Lord Bramwell's second to faint. She marched between the two men, informing them both that she would not have blood shed over her reputation. She then proceeded to deliver a speech that this author wishes she could have transcribed in full, for it was magnificent. She spoke of the ridiculousness of men fighting over women's honor as if women were property without agency of their own. She declared that her reputation was hers to defend or abandon as she chose. She called the entire system barbaric, antiquated, and thoroughly stupid. Then, in front of witnesses, including several members of the ton who had risen early to watch the spectacle, she told the complete truth of what had occurred on the terrace. She described Ashford's drunken advance, her violent rejection of it, and Lady Weatherby's malicious misrepresentation of the scene. Ashford, faced with public humiliation and the threat of social ruin himself if he proceeded with the duel, withdrew his challenge and slunk away like the cur he was. The assembled witnesses, shocked by Victoria's boldness but unable to deny the truth of her account, began to murmur among themselves. But Victoria wasn't finished. She turned to Lord Bramwell and, in front of everyone, told him that she had refused his first proposal because he had offered duty when she wanted love. If he still felt only obligation toward her, he should walk away now and never speak to her again. But if, and here her voice broke slightly, if he felt something more, something real, then he should court her properly, scandal and all. Lord Bramwell's response was to stride across the grass, pull her into his arms despite her masculine attire, and kiss her thoroughly in front of at least 20 members of the ton. When they finally separated, both breathless, he informed her that he had been an idiot to offer anything less than complete devotion, that he had fallen in love with her the moment she refused him, and that he would court her in full view of all society until she believed him. The scandal was delicious, gentle listeners. Some were horrified, others charmed, but all agreed it was the most interesting thing to happen in years. What followed was the most peculiar courtship the ton had ever witnessed. Lord Bramwell, who had never done an improper thing in his life, began breaking rules with abandon, all in the name of proving his love to Victoria. He sent her flowers every day, not proper bouquets, but wild bunches of whatever struck his fancy, including once a collection of dandelions that he claimed reminded him of her uncontainable spirit. He wrote her poetry, terrible poetry that this author had the privilege of glimpsing, comparing her eyes to puddles and her hair to autumn fires, mixing his metaphors with an enthusiasm that was both painful and endearing. He stood outside her window one night playing a violin, badly, as he had never learned, until the watch came to arrest him for disturbing the peace. He challenged anyone who spoke ill of her to a duel, accumulating so many potential engagements that the authorities threatened to arrest him for that too. But most remarkably, he began to change in ways that went beyond mere romantic gestures. The man who had lived his entire life by strict rules began to question those very rules. He spoke in Parliament about the unfairness of women's reputations being destroyed by gossip, while men emerged unscathed. He publicly criticized the double standards that allowed Ashford to continue in society, while Victoria had been ostracized. Victoria, for her part, found herself falling for this new version of Lord Bramwell. Or perhaps it wasn't new at all, but rather the real man who had been hiding beneath layers of propriety all along. She saw the passion he had kept contained, the humor he had suppressed, the wild romantic heart that beat beneath his perfectly tailored coats. Their courtship became the talk of London. Some called it the romance of the century, others declared it a disaster. But no one could ignore it. They were seen everywhere together, walking in the park, attending the opera, dancing at balls, for hostesses had begun inviting them again, if only to ensure their events were interesting. The turning point came at the midsummer ball at Vauxhall Gardens. Lord Bramwell had been courting Victoria for 2 months, and speculation was rife about when he would propose again. What no one knew was that Victoria had already decided to accept him. She had decided weeks ago, truth be told. But she wanted him to be absolutely certain of his feelings first. That night, as fireworks exploded overhead and couples danced beneath the stars, Lord Bramwell led Victoria to the same terrace where her reputation had first been compromised. This author followed naturally, though at a respectful distance. There, in full view of anyone who cared to look, he dropped to one knee. But instead of a traditional proposal, he made a confession. He told her that he had lived his entire life by rules because he had been afraid. Afraid of passion, afraid of mistakes, afraid of feeling too deeply. She had changed all that. She had shown him that honor without love was empty, that propriety without joy was a prison, and that a life lived in fear of scandal was no life at all. He offered her not just his name and protection, but his whole heart, his transformed self, his promise to spend every day proving that love was worth more than all the reputation in the world. Victoria's response was to pull him to his feet and kiss him senseless, right there on the terrace where it had all begun. When they finally parted, she informed him that she had been his from the moment he punched Ashford, but she had needed to be sure he was hers in return. The wedding, dearest listeners, was the event of the season, not because it was grand, though it was, or because it was fashionable, though it became so, but because it represented something revolutionary, a marriage based entirely on love, born from scandal, and celebrated in defiance of society's expectations. The ceremony took place at St. George's in Hanover Square on a September morning, when the light streaming through the windows seemed to turn everything golden. Victoria wore a gown of cream silk that scandalized the matrons by having a lower neckline than strictly proper, her small rebellion against the forces that had tried to destroy her. Lord Bramwell waited at the altar, looking like a man who had won the lottery, the crown jewels, and the keys to heaven all at once. When Victoria appeared, this author observed him actually sway on his feet, so overcome was he by the sight of his bride. The church was packed to the rafters. Every gossip who had whispered about Victoria was there, every gentleman who had cut her, every lady who had turned her back. But they had not come to gawk at a scandal. They had come to witness a triumph. For you see, gentle listeners, in the weeks leading up to the wedding, the truth about that night on the terrace had fully emerged, not by chance, but by design. Lord Bramwell's methodical inquiries into the Wetherby household staff led him to a dismissed lady's maid, eager to share the truth in exchange for a generous reference. The tale of Lady Wetherby's deliberate misrepresentation was soon the most delicious whisper in the servants' halls of Mayfair. But the true vindication came from an unexpected source. Lady Wetherby's own daughter, having witnessed Victoria's courage at the duel and then the radiant, defiant joy of her courtship with Nicholas, could no longer bear the weight of the lie. The sight of a love so true made her own socially manicured future feel like a gilded cage. She publicly admitted that her mother had twisted the truth, that Victoria had been defending herself. The Tun, faced with incontrovertible evidence, did what the Tun always does. It pretended it had known the truth all along. Suddenly, everyone claimed they had never believed the gossip, had always known Victoria was above reproach, had always admired her strength. Victoria and Nicholas, for this author feels we may use their given names now, exchanged vows with tears streaming down both their faces. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the kiss they shared was so passionate that several elderly ladies required their smelling salts. The wedding breakfast was held at Bramwell House. The best man told the story of how Nicholas had practiced his second proposal speech so many times that the servants could recite it from memory. Victoria's eldest brother revealed that she had been writing Lady Victoria Bramwell in her diary since she was 16, though she claimed it was merely to practice her penmanship. But the most touching moment came when Nicholas stood to speak. He thanked fate for the scandal that had brought them together. He declared that he would rather have Victoria with a ruined reputation than any other woman with a spotless one. That scandal had been their matchmaker and gossip their Cupid. Victoria, not to be outdone, stood as well, shocking the traditionalists, and announced her own confession. She had, she admitted, known Lord Bramwell was watching her for years. She had refused all those proposals not just because she was waiting for love, but because she was waiting for him, the only man in London honorable enough to defend her and passionate enough to be worth defending. The revelation caused such an uproar of delight that the orchestra had to play a fanfare to restore order. Their honeymoon was spent at the Bramwell estate in Kent. This author has it on good authority, the housekeeper is a delightful correspondent, that they rarely left their chambers for the first week, looking at each other with such obvious adoration that the servants took to averting their eyes out of decency. Upon their return to London, Victoria became a champion for young women whose reputations had been unfairly maligned. Nicholas discovered that breaking rules was rather addictive, becoming known for his progressive views and his absolute devotion to his wife. He was heard to say that marriage to Victoria was like being in a constant state of beautiful rebellion against boredom. Their first child arrived exactly 9 months after the wedding, a daughter they named Honor, though with a middle name of Scandal, which they kept private. But perhaps the sweetest epilogue came 5 years later. A young lady was found in a compromising position, and the gossips began to circle. Before the whispers could begin, Victoria and Nicholas appeared at her side. Nicholas danced with her, while Victoria informed the biggest gossips that anyone who spread rumors would find themselves excluded from the Bramwells' famously entertaining events. The threat worked beautifully. After all, who would risk missing the parties thrown by the couple whose own scandal had become the Ton's favorite love story? And so, gentle listeners, we see that what begins as ruin can end in triumph. What starts as duty can transform into devotion. And sometimes the sweetest reward comes from the most bitter beginning. Your devoted chronicler, Lady Ravenswood.